Our brother Livre again speaking to us on the subject Be Salt. We call upon our brother Livre.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I think it was sometimes towards the end of last year. That morning, Uncle Chuck was the one speaking, and when he came up here, he was speaking about the Sermon on the Mountain, and throughout his topic, basically, he was talking about this idea of basically how we can be a light to the world. And towards the end of his talk, I mean, it was a great talk, throughout the entirety of it. A lot of practical, ideas as far as how we can be light to the world. And then towards the end of his talk, he basically ended up with the reading that our brother just read for us this morning. Starts off with be salt, but then towards the end, basically points out for us to be light to the world. So that entire morning, it's kind of a coincidence how this turned out. But I had been thinking of salt as well as light, and to me, the idea of being light made a whole lot of sense in the practical sense. But then the notion of being salt never just practically clicked in. And so when he basically pointed out that passage of us having to be light, I was hoping that it was gonna get a little bit more in depth, but then his talk ended up ending there. So I was just like, okay, now what? Maybe this is something I gotta look more into. So, and from that point on, I just started thinking a lot about salt. How can what is salt? How can we practically be salt? Because at the end of the day, I don't know about you guys, but it comes down to like, how practical does it get? As far as the scriptures and how our lives, go hand in hand, basically. So then, in thinking about this idea of salt, so we may have to start with a basic question, right? And that is, what is salt? What is salt? It's a very basic question, to scientific minded folks out there. It's basically a chemical compound, basically, that's formed by mixing sodium as well as chloride, denoted NaCCl. For scientific minded folks out there. And salt in its pure form, it basically comes in a mineral called halite. Actually, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But it's actually where we get the Greek word for halos, meaning salt. That is a definition / a little explanation for my scientifically minded folks out there. But to the rest of us, salt is table salt. The definition doesn't get any simpler than that. It's the table salt that we basically use on a day-to-day basis, at least when it comes to cooking. At least that's a context, from which most of us know salt to be. Yeah. And it was interesting to note too that salt in its purest form, salt actually never decays in its purest form. And just like honey, it doesn't expire as well in its purest form. the reason your table salt that you got at home is gonna have an expiration date is it it looks nice. Yeah, it looks nice. Plus, the only time that salt actually gets to go bad is interesting. You know, learning finding this out is when it's actually mixed up with other condiments, other spices out there that are going bad. Kind of makes us think there, you know, about the idea slash notion of association. So the only time that salt actually gets to go bad is if it's mixed with other spices slash condiments with the potential to also expire or go bad as well. And so that kind of have us think about this whole idea of of association there, which we'll get into in a little bit. So then, essentially, as far as salt is concerned, in its purest form, it symbolizes purity. Purity. So that's the first one. Salt is also a source of preservation as well. So salt can be used as a to preserve food. Among a whole lot of other things out there. Yeah. And salt can also symbolize an expense as well, because salt just by itself, it's a thing of value. And when you think of salt as well, in addition to it being used as a spice type, as a dietary condiment, salt is also used in industrial chemical industries out there as well. Salt actually assists in the cleaning of gas as well as oil wells, and as I've got here, is also an essential component in the manufacture of paper, tires, brass, bleach, case hardened steel. Salt is also used to de-icing roads, kind of like what we got going on with the whole lot of snow out there. Salt is also used as a way to clean water as well. It's a water softener, essentially to be able to clean up water. And salt is also used in the paper industry as well as the textile industry. So there's a whole lot of usage for salt out there, in addition to what I've already mentioned up here. One of my earliest memories about salt, goes back to when I was a toddler, actually living out in a refugee camp, and I recall my cousins, back then, who I call my brothers, because Kibembe, there isn't really a word for cousin, so they're technically my brother. They used to run a little cinema for little kids, and this little cinema enclosed space was pretty small, and the kids would come in, and once all the kids were seated in the front, there was a white screen almost, and whoever was running the show, my brothers / cousins at the time, one or two of them would be out in the back, and they will be basically moving in inanimate object back there. So it's like it's a little shape in the form of a person, and whoever was controlling it back there were basically controlling them. So and the kids sitting in front would all be mesmerized to the show. So whoever was controlling it back there would as is moving the objects, would also be speaking at the same time as well. And as kids at the time, just mesmerized, like, wow, that's so cool. There were times when they would make the inanimate object, actually fight. And as kids, it was a really good source of entertainment at the time. And what a lot of the parents did, though, to make sure that their kids were able to get in, was they paid in the form of salt. So a lot of free stuff, in refugee camps, but not for movies. What the parents used as a source of entrance for their kids to basically be able to entertain / watch the show was they paid in bulk of salt. I look back now and I kind of think funny to myself how my brother son at the time made a whole lot of salt, just by running their cinema. And the word salt, etymology, the word salt actually comes from the Latin word salarium. It's actually where we get this word salary. The word soldier as well is broken down. It's actually Roman for soldare, and it basically means to give salt. And where it originates from, a lot of the Roman soldiers, back in ancient days, were actually paid in salt. Now let's take a look at a few biblical examples of actually what, as far as what we've discussed, how it's applicable in the biblical context. So here, come with me, 2 Chronicles. Here. 2 Chronicles, chapter 13, verse 4 to verse 5. So 2 Chronicles 13, verse 4 to verse 5. As far as the context is concerned here, we got King Abijah at the time, rebuking Jeroboam, for the major errors that were, taking place in the then, divided two kingdoms. It's basically, this is a dialogue to basically, blame him for what's going on and all the erroneous practices that he's got going on as far as priestly practice, among other things, are concerned. And in his remark, as they're getting ready to battle, Abijah basically points this out, starting at verse 4. Abijah, however you pronounce that, stood on Mount Zemaraim in the hill country of Ephraim and said, Jeroboam and all Israel, listen to me. Don't you know that the Lord, the God of Israel, has given the kinship of Israel to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt? Keeps going on and on, but we got this passage right here, that the God of Israel, has given the kinship of Israel, to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt. The idea here, what we see is, knowing that David was meant after God's own heart, the covenant of salt was symbolic of the purity in their friendship. Come with me to the book of Numbers 18, verse 19. Numbers 18, reading of verse 19. Let me actually open that up. So the whole chapter here basically talks about the offerings, that the priest had to basically look over, and God is basically pointing out to them that they could keep the offerings that the folks were basically sacrificing out, and it goes on, but chapter 18 mainly focuses on the let's see, yeah. Looking at verse 19, all the heave offerings of the holy things which the children of Israel offer to the Lord, I've given to you and your sons and daughters with you as an ordinance forever. It is a covenant of salt forever before the Lord with you and your descendants with you. Most of the whole chapter just talks about the different offerings that the people are bringing in, and verse 19 basically God is wants to remind them, because of that, because of the nature of the purity that he wants with them, relationally speaking, that salt was supposed to be added to these sacrifices as well. Now we know that as time went on, as time progresses, that Christ would essentially become that that representative of priesthood, symbolic of the perpetuity of the continuity, of the friendship relationship that was guided by purity there. Let's look at Leviticus chapter 2 verse 11. Leviticus chapter 2 verse 11. This is another chapter as well that's mainly focused on grain offerings as well. So starting at verse 11, we're going to go all the way to 13. Every grain offering you bring to the Lord must be made without yeast. For we are not to burn any yeast or honey in a food offering presented to the Lord. You may bring them to the Lord as an offering of the first fruits, but they are not to be offered on the altar as a pleasing aroma. Verse 13 is key, and it's supposed to be the main focus here. Verse 13 reads, season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings. Add salt to all of your offerings. Yeah, that's how the NIV version reads. But the last part of verse 13 there, add salt, to all of your offerings. And the point to be made here as well, going back to the idea, to the notion of purity, as well as salt being symbolic of a preservation as well, preservative. So when God required salt to be a part of their grain offering, it wasn't just for some random reasons. It was supposed to be symbolic, to show the purity with which He wanted with them, relationally. Like I mentioned earlier, since salt, symbolizes preservation, God also wanted to remind the priest, of that part as well, of their part in terms of what they had to play into this. And there were preservation to their surroundings. So from the opening verses this morning that our brother read to us, when it comes to salt as well, and different examples that pertain to salt being symbolic of purity, preservation and expense as well. There's a whole lot of examples out there in the scriptures. From the opening remarks, Matthew 5, verse 13. Starting at verse 18, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? I just start over again, verse 13. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and be trampled underfoot. From these opening verses, again, as far as what this means to us, in practicality, in practical sense, we are supposed to be, the preservation of our surrounding. As salt, as salt, as being symbolic of purity, in terms of how we interact with our surrounding, with our world, let that be a reminder to us, that we are in this, not just to mix in with whatever is going on to the point where, we become spoiled, but we constantly gotta be reminded that we're supposed to be purity as well as, a source of preservation to our surroundings. So then, in addition to that as well, salt, salt symbolizes purity. Salt symbolizes, preservation as well. So what? How can we actually, practically, be salt to our surrounding? And as I was reading up, as I was, looking more into the idea, the notion of salt as well, I was also looking out there on a few, content on a few things I can read on salt as well. So I basically came across the book, Be Salt. That's actually the title of my exhortation, Be Salt. And the book is by an individual by the name of Rebecca Pilbat. Sorry I think I'm pronouncing her name wrong. But Be Salt, first name is Rebecca. And in a book, Be Salt, basically, the premise of the whole book is the different challenges that she points out that she finds people having whenever they, try to open up to other people about the gospel, about Christ. And she basically points out that one of the reasons that she feels that most people struggle with that idea, of having to open up the gospel to different people out there is because, first of all, people feel inadequate. That they don't feel like they're, well equipped enough to be able to talk to others about the gospel. The second reason he gives out is that, we think that we don't know enough about Christ. The last point she points out was the lack of confidence. A lot of people just feel a lack of confidence when it comes to them being the one having to be those individuals having to preach, share the gospel to others. Yeah, some of us, English isn't our first language maybe, but it's a whole different story. One of the quotes from the book that resonated with me as well, and that she basically points out in the book, pointed out that culture and context have changed, but our gospel hasn't. So we need to share the gospel more emphatically. The story she gives out in the book had to deal with at the time while in college. And she was basically on part of a mission preaching team, and on a team basically, they provided a whole lot of training, in terms of going out there, and being able to present the gospel to different people. While this took place, she would often find herself in situations where she wasn't able to meet her quotas, as far as talking to set amount of people that she was required to reach to. Apologize, my lips are so dry today. She would often find herself in situations where she was not meeting her quotas, as far as meeting and talking to a designated amount of people that she was supposed to talk to. But then something interesting would happen. She'd often find herself in situations where she managed to get one or two conversations with somebody, but then those conversations were deep, with connecting to the people that she met. And her main aim, as far as sharing the gospel to others, was to basically model Christ and Christ's approach when it comes to reaching out and talking to people about the gospel, basically. So the big question becomes, right? So how do we how do we practically become salt? I've kind of answered that in a sense as I keep on going here, but the only way to practically become salt is to model Christ. And how did Christ demonstrate this? Throughout the book, Rebecca mentioned out that Christ throughout his preaching, as well scripturally speaking as well, Christ demonstrated respect, by closely listening to those that were in need. Christ also asked provocative questions, and throughout the process would also arouse people's interest as well. As Christ communicated to people, tried connected with people, and in terms of how it's just being salt around his surrounding, Christ was never in a rush whenever having a dialogue with or trying to connect with those around him. We see that through Christ's own model, Christ cared, he loved as well as valued, those around him as well. Now, when it comes to us being salt to our surroundings as well, trying to connect with those around us, just like Christ did, we can't also forget to be, to be wise as well, throughout our process. Sometimes, we try connecting with people, and it seems just like something just seems off, in situations like that as well. We are called to, be discerning, as serpent, and be wise enough to know whether or not, this, relational thing that we're trying out, is it gonna go somewhere? Is it not gonna go somewhere? When I was reading the book as well, it kind of reminded me of a quote that I had some times back, and the quote was by John Maxwell. In this idea, of trying to, relationally relate to others, and the quote that John Maxwell pointed out goes along the lines of, at the end of the day, it's as much as we want to be relationally involved connected, try connecting with others. At the end of the day, too, and this is the quote, people don't really care what you know until they know that you care. So as I was reading the book, I was reminded of that quote as well. And that I like that quote a lot, because it reflect on it reflect on how Christ basically went about his life. He cared first about the people that he was going to reach out to. You know, Christ cared about the people that he was, he was going to be reaching out to first before he, tried anything as far as, preaching the word, preaching the gospel. It should be the same lesson for us as well. First we care, for the people, for those around us. Then we try to move forward with the message, with the gospel. And one other thing that I wanted to mention here, as far as reading materials is concerned, recently came across another book as well. The book is entitled, Questions People Ask in Their 20s. And the title caught my eye because I'm in my 20s. I have a few questions, about life. And I'm like, okay, that definitely sounds like a good, good copy, a book for one to read, for one to grasp. And in the book, one of the comments, one of the ideas that's talked about is this idea of, oftentimes a lot of people in our 20s, feel lost. There isn't really like a whole sense of direction. It's like, you're feeling tossed, back and forth. Definitely speak from experience. It's like, I didn't think I was gonna, have me, push around this way, and this particular passage as well basically deals with purpose, and it basically compares somebody seeking their purpose in life to being an explorer. As an explorer, oftentimes you don't know. As an explorer, oftentimes you know where you're going, but you don't know how to get there. And what the book basically points out to a lot of folks in their 20s is that, hey, it's okay to get lost, while you're trying to find your way to your final destination. But this idea of a lot of young people out there, I'm speaking from experience here, if you're going through that as well, you're not alone. We're all in this together. But oftentimes in our 20s as well, it's easy for us to, get caught up into our own worlds. Not seeming, not feeling that, we're getting our way out there. But despite navigating all of this, life, directions, let's not forget on what's important. And that is God's, valued asset, which is, connecting, as well as, relationships with others, being salt. That's practically, essentially what it comes down to. Now, as you're about to, break bread, as well as, remember Christ, the really biggest symbol, what it is to be, to be a preservative to your surrounding, what it means to be pure around those around you. Let's remember our covenant, to strive to be pure, as well as, preservative to our surroundings that we made with Christ. A covenant that reminds us, what it means to really be salt. I'd like to close with these few remarks here. The first one from 1 John chapter 5. 1 John verse 5 to verse 7. This is the message we have heard from him and declared to you. God is light. In him there is no darkness at all. If we claim to have fellowship with him and yet walk in the darkness, we lie and do not live out the truth. But if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And the blood of Jesus, his son, purifies us from all sin. Mark 9, verse 50. Mark 9, starting at verse 49 to 50. Everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can you make it salty again? Have salt among yourselves and be at peace with one another. It's a good closing remarks, but good. My whole goal was to, basically get us thinking about different possibilities, really, as far as us being salt to our surroundings. I know there's different ways out there that we can go about that.